Zainab, welcome to Dil Ki Recipes podcast. I am just so excited to have you on this platform to talk to me today.
Thank you, Sheeza. I am delighted to be here.
Our topic for today is focused on coaching and coaching as a profession and coaching in
Mhm.
the South Asian therapy because this is something that has kind of crept in and created a big space for itself in our diaspora. And there are lots and lots of coaches now. And I am big on abundance, and I feel that mental health and self help and self improvement is such an important element of life that having
Mm.
somebody by your side in that journey to help you grow to be better, stronger, wiser is so important. And I really want to emphasize it and talk about it so our listeners have an idea of what this is, if they are a good fit for it. And also, I
Mm.
am really looking to validate for so many people who are, coaches to know that, I'm so excited for their journey as well.
Thank you, Sheeza. It's a field that to some extent is relatively new, but both powerful and empowering. And I know that you're one of the first people I had this conversation with about continuing education and its significance. And I haven't forgotten that the more you empower your toolkit, the wider your birth and power to help becomes.
Welcome to Dil Ki Recipes on your favorite social media platform. Hi, I'm Dr. Sheeza Mohsin, executive coach, relationship expert, and your coach in this virtual space to support you and your Desi family in America. If you identify as being a person of color, a minority, and having some form of bicultural identity, a major goal of putting this information out is to help you realize you're not alone in this journey. If you identify as a Desi with cultural roots in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and surrounding areas, trying to meet your life and relationship needs and desires while embracing some beautiful elements of your cultural heritage, Dil Ki Recipes is for you. If you don't identify as a Desi, but have a warm, loving, human being kind of disposition and you want to better yourself, I think you'll find some good stuff in here as well. So let's go on with the show. So, Zainab, I want to talk about you a little bit and share with our listeners a little bit about you because I have always learned so much from our conversations. You have a very unique background. Of course, the one that is my favorite is that you have lived in 10 countries. In the West, a lot of people who are in the military and know how to pack up bags and start a new life are called military brats, military families who move a lot and they have to change schools and social lives and rebuild a life in all these different places. So I think we will do a separate episode where we will talk about our immigrant population and your experience. I do want to talk a little bit about your training and your background. So you have a master's in philosophy and a special focus on psychodynamics. And then, of course, you've done humanistic counseling training, you have done Thrive coach training, and now you are so successful in your practice as a tiny habits coach. And of course, needless to say, we met eons ago when you were editor in chief of one of the pioneer magazines focused on women called Women's Own. You were doing some amazing work in there. You've taught psychology as well as philosophy at a college level. You've taught in the IB program, high school level. Just welcome to this podcast, and I am so excited to talk to you.
Thank you, Sheeza. I am thrilled to be here. And, what can I say? I'm delighted for different reasons. Delighted because I get to speak about my favorite topic. I get to speak to one of my favorite people. And I had actually forgotten that we had met that long ago
Yeah.
in Karachi. And then our paths crossed here again. I'm based in Seattle, as you know. And Shiza, I cannot say enough about how much you have supported me in me setting up my practice here. My private practice, the beginnings of that, the LLC, your warmth and support in telling me how critical my coach training could be. Already being a humanistic counselor was an added dimension to my toolkit. And I know that that's what you speak about a lot. And I wanted to start off our conversation by asking you, Shiza, why do you think supervision is essential for coaches working with South Asian clients?
That is a beautiful question. I'll tell you my short term answer. It is very critical and essential, but I'll tell you my fundamental belief about supervision, or I interchangeably call it case consultation for those of us who have been in the field for a minute. I will say that it is one of the most critical things that all of us professionals need to do once in a while because it's so important to check and double check and recheck your thinking, especially as you are growing in the profession and almost understanding the vulnerability of your client to be depending on your expertise. And when you are new,
Mm,
one of the biggest areas of learning is the self of the coach, the self of the therapist. How much are your biases and your personal life experiences dictating what you are suggesting to your client? Is that good
mhm,
for them? Because we don't know the answer to that. You have to be very careful in how you are supporting this person who's trusting you, their time, with their financial resources, and with their mind. So, initially in
mm,
training, it is so important to get your wiring right in terms of what your
mm.
protocol is to make it a very safe and successful experience for your client.
Yeah, that's so important to know and to realize. Absolutely. Thank you for
So,
that.
supervision in general, and as you get experience, case consultation only gives you more tools specifically for the South Asian community because we are a new community in this space. We don't have 50 years and lots of volumes of expertise that is documented. So, we have to
Mm,
rely on the actual live experiences of colleagues and experts in those fields to help make sense of certain things. I was supervising a
mm,
coach this morning, and the issues are always so unique because we don't have hundreds of thousands of documented evidentiary support just yet. We're building it.
right,
And
right.
maybe there'll be a
Yeah.
time where we can lean on supervision less, but right now it's critical. I want you to tell our listeners, how does being trained as both a therapist and a coach play out for you in your sessions, in your work, and how you organize your thoughts and your when you plan your session?
Thanks for asking that, Shiza. That's an important one. And firstly, I will say that as someone who has both been in supervision as a therapist and a coach, and then also had time periods when I've not been in supervision, I feel the difference. I see the difference in my body, in my stamina, in my growth. So the fact that you do supervision, I think, is huge, huge resource. Yes, I'm grateful to have been trained in both. I was working as therapist before I was here, based in Seattle, and now as a behavioral coach. I am careful to try and not blur the boundaries. For example, if I, and I know you're going to talk, you and I can talk about that later as well. So if there's a case with trauma, right, with distinct trauma, then that is not something that I would handle. I would then refer them to a therapist. I think one has to be very conscientious and sensitive as a coach to realize what is coaching and what falls into the domain of therapy, and then accordingly. I am grateful for having both kinds of training because I think the humanistic lens that I was trained in, Carl Rogers, Fritz Perls, etc., that gives me an added dimension to often understand the situation in a more sensitive way. So, humanistic lens helps with understanding the situation, and then coaching steps in as something more behavioral, more methodological, more today, and geared towards the future. I'm grateful for both, but I try and be very careful about the
And
difference.
I'll tell you, Zainab, let me build on what you're saying. Being careful about the difference is a space I like pointing out to my supervisees. It's more for the benefit of your client. It's more to understand, what do they need right now? Do they need to heal? Do they need to stabilize? Or do they need to optimize into an action?
Yeah.
My prediction is that eventually we're going to be in a space where we'll need to do both. It's
Yes.
like, here are my feelings. We've processed them. Now, what do I do? Well,
Yeah.
just feel it.
Absolutely.
Think about it. No, there has to be some movement, some actionability in life. So, a lot of times when we have the hat to help a client mobilize into something that is good for them, it is very empowering for them. because then they can see change. And
It's a critical hack.
it's a beautiful thing. So I feel, this is my belief and maybe a little bit of bias because I have both trainings, that you actually are coming to your client with a stronger tool belt, right?
Oh,
Because
yes,
you can support
totally
them
agree.
in multiple ways.
And on that note, Shiza, I'd like to ask once again, as someone who has dealt with both, I sometimes do find myself being concerned about, okay, what exactly are the boundaries? And I'd like to ask you, for those of us working as coaches who are careful to not to blur, what is not coaching, and when does a case need therapy, legal, or safe resources?
Thank you for asking that. When I coach coaches, this is something I immediately tell them that, this is your holy book that you have to go by, especially when it comes to coaching. Because, when you are a counselor, especially if you're working as a professional licensed in a state, you have to honor the rules of that state. And so you can work in those spaces. But when you're a coach, you are definitely want to make sure that you are referring out. And that is only the ethical thing to do. So the examples are, if somebody is suicidal, you notice psychosis, you notice mania, if you notice intimate partner violence, there's any kind of control. And this is not just physical, there's financial control, whether it's, forced sex, if it's all kinds of control mechanisms that are deep psychologically rooted things. If there is a clinical disorder, if there is a mood disorder, if there is substance abuse, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drugs, where the person really might know when they are not triggered or in their addiction, that this is bad for them, but then struggling with getting out of that habit to stabilize, it's very important that you know the difference, that you make sure that you are not taking them on as a coaching client. They need clinical therapy. If anything,
Right.
they need expertise, they need clinical expertise to help them. So you want to be very conscientious about that. And as a coach, it's very important for you to say no, this is not a good fit for me, this needs to
Yeah.
be referred out. And I tell coaches, and I actually tell counselors, because counselors who may not have coaching training, I tell them, have a strong referral list. You need to help your client. So what you need to do is say, you know what, you may want to work with this coach because I think you are a
Yes.
lot more stable now in your emotional regulation. And now you need a little bit of help into converting that into actions if you are not trained to do that. And similarly, it is a coach's responsibility, and to say, you know what, this is very clinical. I want to do what's best for
Yeah.
you. I want to be ethical. I think I need to refer you out, and have your referral list of the counselors that you've worked with that you know will be able to help your client. Because remember, the ultimate goal is to help that client move forward, be happy. If they're going through something terrible they have to do, you want to pray they do that with dignity and grace, and they can come out of it with a lot of grace.
Shiza, I can't resist adding another question onto this one, piggyback on it. Do you feel that geographically there is a difference between this coach counselor awareness issue, like in South Asia or in North America? Is there a difference, or are people equally not equipped or well equipped
So
as
I will
coaches?
tell you, in my view, there's a definite difference. I'll
Okay.
tell you, the coaching professional here has a lot of beautiful guidelines. There's a body, there's the International Coach Federation. You have so many
Mhm.
wonderful
Mhm.
credited organizations who roll out courses that are accredited by them and so forth. That's, one of the ones that
Yeah.
I attended was, validated by them. So, you have a governing body. The problem with our parts of the world is it's haphazard. And so unfortunately, I want to present that, and all the coaches hearing, you want to know this is coming from a good place. It's really important because unfortunately, I can say this for some things that I have noticed coming out of Pakistan. When the credentials of a person are checked, there is no formal training. But because of the scarcity of talent, and there is a
Yeah.
strong communication skills or strong media presence and followership and all of that, there is a following and people are working with them. I'm not saying that they weren't able to help people, but there is a huge
Mhm.
professional limitation there because they're helping them out of their life experiences, what they may have read. And so informal training can be dangerous sometimes. And again, I'm inviting everyone who's in that field, because I'm sure they're helping some people, to just go out and go train. If this is something that you have a talent for, then, train. You and I, we've been trained by organizations. I can speak for myself. My clients were the ones who pushed me to start social media, because I kept getting these reels they would send me, and they'd like, she said, is that making sense? And I'm like, no. And then I would explain this. And when it happened for months, at least a good half a dozen of my millennial clients are like, well, clearly you need to then go and say something in your piece. So by the time you and I land in this space, we already have our credibility. We have lots of clients,
Yeah,
but there are people who are gaining the followership and so forth. My invitation to them is just keep sharpening your saw. Go learn. If you already have some kind of talent, just professionally get trained. There's a lot of value in that. So I definitely
sure.
see, because there are limited governing bodies, there is a little bit danger as well. And I will tell you, one of the biggest dangers, again, it's in my area of specialty, where I see so much disaster happening, which kind of inculcates a bigger fear, is marriage counseling, relationship counseling,
Mm,
because there's very limited resource there. And then
mm,
people's relationships that, from my perspective, are definitely savable, end up
yes,
in exits, and that were not necessary if they had the right kind of help.
so true.
So, thank you for asking that question, though, Zainab. I want you to tell
Mhm.
us and our listeners a little bit about behavioral coaching. How do you see it helping clients?
Thanks, Shiza. I think that's a big one. My work involves, quite simply speaking, helping people to modify behaviors and habits to reach their goal. As you know, the tiny habits method is what I use. I was trained by BJ Fogg, who's a behavioral scientist, and I cannot thank him enough. And he has a lab at Stanford, Behavior Design Lab. And his philosophy is start small, start tiny, because tiny is mighty. So small steps will take you to your goals. Another one of his beliefs is neuroplasticity, which is how we can rewire our brain. So the idea is that through modifying habits and behaviors, we not only do we achieve our goals, but we can also reshape or rewire the way we think. The idea is, in a tiny habits recipe, quite simply, you have anchor, behavior, celebration. So supposing somebody comes to me, the goals are so varied, or the aspirations. Sometimes they'll say, I want to feel less stress. I want a better relationship with my spouse. I want to be more conscientious about work. I want better self esteem. I want to understand my limitation. Whatever your goal may be, the idea is to start with small behaviors through which I support them, I check in on them, and I'm very conscious of an individual need, and that's where the humanistic lens, because everyone
Mm,
is so different. One of BJ's beliefs, which I totally go by, is it's not a personal flaw, it's a design flaw. If you are not being able to achieve your goals, it's not because there's something wrong with you. You're going about it the wrong way. Like motivation is the least reliable of vectors. When people say, okay, I'll lose weight when I get motivated to exercise. No, please don't rely on motivation. It's small behaviors, the repetition of which rewire the way you think. And there's a whole methodology to the way I work, which I feel is very beneficial and has helped a number of people. Shiza, I do also want to say, just going back to what you said, that there are a lot of people out there calling themselves coaches without formal training, which is, I think, and maybe coming from the goodness of their heart. People have told them, you're great to speak to, why don't you help us? But training is necessary. As you and I have often discussed in the past, I was trained by two different places in terms of coaching. It is important, whether you're being trained as a therapist, which I have done, or as a coach. Please don't disregard the significance of training, because you also spoke about marriage counseling, Shiza, and I've had clients say that, can you do marriage counseling for us? And I say no, because I'm not trained as a marriage counselor or as a marriage coach. But there are people I know who blur those boundaries, and then not much good comes from there. That can be a bit scary.
So many times I've heard, of course I can do marriage counseling, I'm married. Those don't add up.
Speaking of the men out there, how Shiza would you coach a man caught between spouse and parent without becoming necessarily a part of the triangle? Because that's a very oft seen scenario, right?
We could have our own complete long session. As you know, I specialize in marriage on this
Yeah.
topic, as most men, unfortunately, it's really sad. Most men struggle with that, the triangulation between mom and wife. Both sides of the family have that if then position. If he is taking care of his parents, then he is not prioritizing me and my children. If he is loyal to his wife and children, then he is not respecting us as parents. So there are all these if then modalities. And, this is where I feel a lot more of the millennial and Gen X men in the South Asian culture are affected because this is not a very emotionally intelligent, tech savvy, chat GPT is my therapist people, and who can get a lot of insight. These are people who are feeling guilty and bad all the time because they feel they're doing a bad job. This is also a population that, played cricket out on the street and was laughing and was valued for just focusing on getting a good job and not into like the gossipy family dynamic and all of that. But then the poor sod, the day they got married,
Yeah.
the next morning, the family is expecting them to have a PhD in relational dynamics and how to balance things. So they are getting like,
Yeah.
hit from both sides. Oh my goodness, the criticism, the judgment. So they feel like, oh my goodness, I thought that this was going to be a fun time, and all I get is guilt and shame from both sides. So how do I coach them? Is I bite size it to the first step. So the first thing I tell them is that you have to admit and stand your ground on loyalty to both and not a competition between both. What does that mean? That means if your wife complains about your mother or your parents, you're going to listen and you're going to be quiet and you're going to say, I understand. And when your parents do that, you're going to be quiet. You are not going to go to the other and give them instructions on don't do this to my wife or don't do this to my parents, because guess what? The person who's going to be beaten is you. And what you're going to say is that I love you both. I cannot live without either one of you. And you guys will have to help me in making this work. This is not just a me problem. And so standing that ground of not taking sides, being neutral, is the first baby step. Solving issues is step number 5 and number 6, but just practicing neutrality, practicing not running to
Yeah.
one or the other with feedback, with reactions is the baby step
Yeah.
a lot of times.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. I do have a question. What if they say, I cannot be neutral because I'm so triggered. I'm so angry.
And that's a beautiful response. And you're going to say, then the first step is to take care of yourself. So we're not going to work on that step. We're going to work on your trigger and what happens. Because remember, and I can speak this to you because, the neurotransmitters are firing and it's a trauma response.
Yeah.
So what happens is that they're going in their fear brain and it's fight, flight, or freeze. So removing themselves from the situation, learning how to emotionally regulate and not reacting. And sometimes not reacting means walking away from the situation, having neutral responses, and I give them a culture, family appropriate response to say that we'll just remove them from the situation. Because again, we're not dealing with the grand plan of how things should be, and there should be boundaries, and there should be this, and there should be respect. None of that, because that's too much. Right now, the first step is de escalation,
So,
which means walking away.
and do you feel that you have an equal number of men and women coming to you for these issues, or is
So,
there a
so
gender
this
disparity
is,
there?
thank you for asking that question. I will say that this is not common for all practices, but my practice is, if not 50% men, a little more than 50% men. So I have
Oh,
a higher number of male clients.
Sheila, that's interesting because most people I know have the opposite, including me.
So yeah, I know, and I do, because remember, my specialty is marriage, men's issues, as well as any relational conflict, whether it's intergenerational. So I work with a lot of men, right? I'm working with dads, husbands, and the executive coaching practice where I work with a lot of leaders. So that automatically, the trust that's built, then when they need to do relational work, they come in my practice, which, so I do have a much larger population of men.
That's very interesting. Okay, good to know.
So, Zainab, I want to ask you this client and coach space. Talk to me about what are critical, integral aspects of that.
I will say that some of the integral needs for that space are similar to a counseling space. And again, I'm thinking of Rogers here when I talk about warmth and congruence, unconditional positive regard, trust.
Yes, it's
If
my
someone
favorite.
My favorite word regarding that space is trust. And I always tell people, when somebody comes to me and, I do my sessions on Zoom, which is great because I get to reach out to people all over the world. Someone reaches out and says, we'd like to book a session. I tell them, okay, let's have a 10-15 minute chat first to see if we're a good fit. And I tell them that the difference between coming to a coach or a counselor as opposed to going to a medical doctor is that not one size is going to fit all. So if you have asthma or if you have an illness, then the chances are that both doctors, two different medical doctors, are going to prescribe the same thing. But I feel that a good coach may be very different from another good coach or a therapist. So the key is what works for you. And I do tell them that let's try it out. And if we feel it's not a good fit, it's not one size fits all. And I think that's two things to be aware of. One is the need for trust, the need for confidentiality, and to make your client or coachee feel that this is a safe space. So, unconditional positive regard. You do not judge. We do not judge. And that's where we have people like you, Shiza. So, for example, if I do straddle feelings of bias or judgment, then that's where supervision is critical. So, trust is important. And I feel what is important is to understand that not all coaches and not all therapists are good for all people. You need to find someone who resonates with your energy and who makes you feel that you can talk freely and from the heart.
I'd like to definitely jump to asking you about a space that you work in where you do a group, you go facilitate a group where you are dealing with women who go through divorce, the tragedy of divorce and separation, and the healing process there. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Because it's so important to highlight that. And I just want to validate something you said is that a lot of times our profession in coaching as well as in therapy, we forget that we are human too.
Yeah.
So in supervision, we have to say, you know what, this person's triggering me. So even while we are working with others, we have to take care of ourselves. So I just loved that you mentioned that.
When I speak with you, there's always so much of interest. I just want to quickly go back to what you said in relation to trust. When clients fear gossip, how do coaches feel?
Mm.
And then I'll answer the bit about women and going through divorce. Absolutely.
Yes. So clients fear gossip is a real thing. It's really important, like you said, to build trust. The other thing that I like doing is I like talking about trust and gossip immediately because guess what? We're working in the South Asian community. By virtue of our field, even in the counseling field, there's overlap. There are no 6 degrees of separation. There aren't that many therapists that you can work with somebody you don't know or won't come across. Because remember, the groups are just close, especially when you're in the same town. So you have to have disclosed to them how you work. You also have to
Yeah.
disclose to them what may happen if they feel that their trust is violated. So I go through a protocol with my clients saying, if you ever feel that this is something that came out from me, regardless of our trusting relationship, in our worst of vulnerabilities, you might think, oh my God, she's just the only person who knows. I need to be your first stop because there's nothing more important for me than your trust. And so I'm like, you need to come and you have to lay it out like an auntie. Did you
Yeah.
say this? Did this happen? I am, don't ever be
Uh,
formal because it is
got it.
so important for you to check your assumption because it is going to mess up our therapeutic
Yeah.
space. It will not be good. And
Yeah.
so addressing that is really important. And as a professional, which I see violated once in a while, I'm not a fan of it. A lot of times, new therapists present themselves, even in the close circles of supervision, group supervision, where the way they talk about someone, it's almost like they are flexing their weight, that there is this person in the community that could be important or blah, 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 that they are. If they're directly in case consultation with me, I will be the first one to have a chat with them to say, even if this was in a professional space, that is unacceptable. I have zero tolerance. And not that I will just, I will coach them to say, you know what, this is not the best way to share that. Even if you think and are aware that there's one person who might know this client, you want to talk about them in such general terms that nobody even thinks that it's that person. That is your responsibility. So I'm very strict about
Wow.
that. Whether they share with the whole world, here I am doing those things, and I have a funny story I'll quickly share. I'm very strict about it. And children, they literally feel like any exposure to my client is like the plague. And I have a home office, and so they have strict protocol in terms of they never overlap with a client. So I went somewhere socially, and they know I have clients in the community, and so I introduce everyone generally. And so if they come across me and they're, here are my kids, this is a friend, this is whatever. And now
Yeah.
the stigma is so reduced, especially my younger clients are like, oh my God, we work with your mom. She's blah, blah, blah. And they'll say such wonderful things. And while my kids are entertained, then they're like, Mom, so much so for your confidentiality, I will kill you or you will die if you come in front of my client. And it's like, look at all of them. Like they just come to our faces. We don't even know how to respond.
When you're helping someone heal, coaching or counseling, figure out what their golden behavior is. There's a process through which we do that, and I use that in my work, again, science
Zainab,
based.
please tell our clients what a golden behavior is. I'm sure now they're wondering.
A golden behavior is that something works for you. I cannot assume that all great behaviors are going to work for all people. My husband runs every day. That is his golden behavior. Makes him less anxious, makes him feel better, makes him think better, makes him fitter. For me, that would not be a golden behavior. I hate running. Figure out what your golden behavior is. A golden behavior is something that's ideally easy and something that you like to do.
What role, in your view, culture plays in the ability to adopt healthy, beneficial
Oh,
behaviors or increase those golden
yeah.
behavior?
So I do want to say, I wouldn't say all, but many South Asian coaches of mine find it very hard to celebrate themselves. And I just want to leave people with that word, celebration, because the Tiny Habits method, BJ's method, is anchor behavior celebration. Three small steps. You want to feel less anxiety, do breathing every morning. I learned this quite recently, Sheeza, that apparently 90 seconds of impactful breathing can rewire your anxiety system. 90 seconds. And people take breath work for granted. So many of my clients now are doing 4-7-8 breathing in the morning. We need an anchor. So they're like, anchor is after I brush my teeth, put the toothbrush down, I will do 3 minutes of 4-7-8. Then I tell them, then it's time to celebrate yourself. Give yourself that hug. Feel those fingers go in or say, yay, fist bump, high five, I did it. So the North American or, the European clients will be like, yes, we've been celebrating. And you're right, it creates what Fogg calls a feeling of shine. It rewires the brain for the positive, makes you feel you remember. But my South Asian clients will start giggling. They find it very funny to tell themselves, you got this, babe. And many times I'm ending my session with, cajoling them to sink those fingers into their shoulders and say, I've got this. So celebration, sadly, is something that a lot of us don't grow up with. A rewarding culture, a celebrating culture, as opposed to a culture of criticism. And I'm not saying this is across the board, and I'm not saying this applies to everyone, but for most people. So why are South Asians reluctant to celebrate their habits? It does rewire the way you think. Toxic shame is multi generational. John Bradshaw wrote a book called The Healing the Shame. So chances are if your mother had scripts of shame, it's going to be passed down to you. You can break it. Behavioral work will help you break the shame.
What happens when the behavioral coaching is not working? How do you know this is effective for your clients?
This is a core part of the Tiny Habits philosophy, which is that not all behaviors work for all people. So when I'm working with someone, just like I'm not a robotic process, neither are they. They are not a robotic process either. So if you have a behavior that's not working for you, in a week or so, we will adapt that. We will either change the behavior, we will change the anchor. Maybe it's the time of the day. Maybe somebody who really wants to get into yoga just didn't have the right anchor. They were doing it after lunch when they felt sleepy. Maybe they need to move it to the morning or to after work. So, when a behavioral plan is not working, we need to be, as coaches, very open to the needs of the other and to try and either help them adapt their anchors or their prompts or the behavior themselves. So ask them what works for them. And if it doesn't, you find something else that does. And I would like to say that most of my work has been successful.
You know, the reality is we're showing up in the support, mental health, wellness field, and we have to support each other. We have to make sure that people have access to multiple ways to
Yeah.
get where they need to go.
What kind of supervision guidance helps coaches in this space?
So I'm going to tell you, what is the coach looking to do? Get them comfortable with not keeping it quiet or supporting them in keeping it quiet?
That's a very good question.
So it's very important for the coach to know that they're
Yeah.
biased about what the client
Yeah, their
needs.
own bias, right?
And because a lot of times right now, you know, we have the Women's Lib organization, we have so much women empowerment going on, Me Too movement, all of those good things going on. But at the end of the day, every woman is in her own journey and has her own truth. So it's very important
Yeah, yeah,
to understand what how you're trying to support them. Is your job to convince them, or is your job to support them in that
yeah.
based on their readiness? And I'll tell you why. So I'm a multicultural therapist. I like not introducing more tension than already is in those situations.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you why one of the reasons women keep it quiet, because they can't control toxicity of the South Asian community in being curious and not concerned. People are not concerned, most of them. They're just curious about what happened. And so they want to keep it quiet till they're ready to answer those inappropriate, intrusive questions that everybody's going to ask. And that's men and women
Yeah.
alike. Because remember, we are great as a community, as a collective community, as long as there's a shadi, something to celebrate. We may not praise. So when you were saying celebrate, I was thinking praise versus criticism, because our community is fantastic at criticism. They don't know how to praise, they don't know how to validate. I'm
Yeah.
generalizing, many of us do. But when it comes to anything less than perfect, then it's like the curiosity, the gossip, all of that is a lot for somebody going through a tragedy like that. So I understand the cultural norms, that especially if they're integrated in the culture, for them to do that. And it is the coach's responsibility to meet them where they are, to make sure that they are not deciding whether it's a good thing for them, how they should feel about it, how times have become
Yeah.
modern. You do not introduce change to your client at a time they're going through possibly the biggest change in their life.
And that's another reason why supervision is critical. As you're helping other people move on with their lives, you have to be very aware of the bias and the perspective that you may be subconsciously putting out there.
Absolutely. Zainab, one of the things I am always asking my supervisees when I'm supervising coaches or therapists is, what is your client's truth? You have to work with them and help them in their truth, not how you see the situation. If their truth is that this is the villain, this is the family, this is what they're going to ask me, meet them there. This is not your
Yes.
job
Yes.
to tell them, this is not like this. You don't have to worry about it. It's not a big deal. That's not their truth. Their truth is, this is a big deal. They are going to have dire consequence from whatever they are experiencing and scared about. You have to meet them where they are emotionally and then hold their hand gently and walk with them at the speed they're comfortable with. So always be in check with their truth.
And that, I think, is once again where the critical need for supervision comes in, because for so many of us, there's this voice leaping out, right? From our jugular to say, no, no, you're wrong. I don't think your mother is a bad person. We want so much to do that. But that's where to just look at the essence of the person, essence of what they are saying, not what you would like it to be.
Absolutely. And this is like, for example, the role you're talking about. While there are so many mother-child relationships that are beautiful, we completely minimize the presence of a parent-child relationship that's toxic. It happens all the time in our community.
If a coach is asked to explain the difference between coaching versus therapy, we get asked that a lot. What would be the best way to explain that?
It's a very important thing to remember the goals are different, right? For example, the goal of coaching could be to build habits, like you said, skills, improve performance, well being. Primary aim for therapy, for example, would be to manage and regulate feelings, right? Making sure they're taking care of trauma, making sure that there is emotional regulation. So, taking care of the chaos, the noise, the distortions, the pain has a lot more to do with therapy and counseling. And coaching is when you're mobilizing all of that into action plans, strengthening,
Right.
goals. So, one is more focused on emotional, relational, feeling regulational. And then the other is based more on outcomes and actions as I see it.
We have a responsibility to have these resources under our belt. So if we have someone who could benefit by a different kind of work, we then move on and refer, right? Coaching is mobilizing action, therapeutic space, listening more to feelings, addressing trauma.
So I would definitely invite everyone listening, especially if they're in this field, and also consumers, to share resources. If you're benefiting from listening to this, share it with someone. If you are a professional, make sure you know someone who is good at all these different things that you may not be good at, but you can point your client in that direction.
Thank you, Sheeza.
Thank you so much. You just warm my heart. Everyone, have a wonderful day. Hopefully, you got something out of it. We're always looking forward to some feedback if you want to hear more of this. And see you soon in another recording. Thank you, Zainab. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Sheeza.
Please remember to keep listening and watching as part of your weekly self-care and learning ritual. You know there are lots of commonalities in our lives, relationships, in our joys and struggles. And my hope is that this material will help you expand your perspective, give you some clarity on how to think about things, and ultimately make you feel better and sorted about your life and relationships. Hope you have a fulfilling and wholesome day.